Arlington Cemetery, where America has buried its war dead since the Civil War.
We expect people to be very careful with the lives of American soldiers.
Many of these headstones honor those who lost their lives during the invasion of France on D-Day in 1944. Among the graves is a plaque that commemorates one of the enduring mysteries of World War II, honoring more than 600 men who died in the weeks leading up to D-Day in a training exercise gone horribly wrong.
It's a very difficult and complex operation, and mistakes will happen.
It could have been avoided. It didn't need to happen.
A tragic disaster that killed men unprepared for war.
We were just targets.
Ships packed with raw recruits, unknowing bait for the enemy.
We're supposed to have destroyer escorts.
Ruthlessly ambushed by German torpedo boats.
There was fire all over. The whole sky was lit up.
This film reveals what really happened, with exclusive eyewitness testimony from those who were there.
The water was just covered with bodies.
And how American soldiers came under fire from their own side.
He was in England. How could he be killed in action?
Leaving many of the dead unaccounted for.
I've lived with that most of my life, knowing that he wasn't found.
The idea that they would leave men buried in unmarked graves is offensive.
Did America's Supreme Commander order a cover-up?
Eisenhower says, fix the boys up, but you can't document anything.
Will the families of the dead and missing and the surviving veterans finally get the answers they've been looking for? D-Day, June 6, 1944. In Normandy, the invasion of mainland Europe begins. The biggest amphibious assault the world has ever seen. Landing on the beaches of northern France, 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops, many of whom have never seen combat before. But D-Day didn't happen by chance. 6 weeks earlier, on this deserted beach in southern England, thousands of American troops began rehearsing for what would become their finest hour. This is Slapton Sands in the county of Devon. In April 1944, it was chosen to represent Utah Beach in Normandy, the designated landing point in France for 23,000 U.S. troops.
Normandy invasion is the biggest operation of the war for the British and the Americans. It's the most significant operation of the war, bar none. There's nothing else that compares to it.
In overall command of this complex operation is General Dwight D. Eisenhower. His big worry is that the men who will be assaulting Utah Beach are rookies. Before facing the Germans in combat for the first time, Eisenhower thinks his troops need toughening up. He orders a full-scale military exercise involving 300 British and American ships and around 30,000 U.S. Army and Navy servicemen with live ammunition. The Royal Navy will shell each side of the beachhead as the GIs storm ashore. From the beach, machine guns will fire over their heads, close enough to warn, but not to kill. The rehearsal code name was Exercise Tiger. Dawn, April 27, 1944. Tiger begins with broadsides from Royal Navy ships. The Allied ships are shelling their own troops. There's been a mix-up about the timing of the landings and the naval bombardment. Then in the early hours of the next morning, things go from bad to worse. A convoy of landing ships simulating the trip to Normandy is ambushed by German torpedo boats.
Go! Abandon ship! Abandon ship!
When it's over, more than 600 Americans are dead, Eisenhower immediately declares the entire operation top secret, an order that spawns decades of questions and controversy. It is the most mysterious training disaster of the war. The families of the dead will not be told what happened for many months or even years, and the official documents relating to the tragedy will remain classified for decades. 70 years later, many of those who lost relatives at Slapton Sands have no clear idea about how they died or why. One of them is Ron Jensen, who's still looking for answers. His great-uncle from Illinois was sent to England in 1944 as an Army driver to take part in Exercise Tiger.
His name was Leland Simmons, known as Uncle Hap, I guess, because of his outgoing personality. The family didn't know how he was killed. They just got the telegram saying he was killed in action. But I think it was, they were like, well, he was in England. How could he be killed in action? He was 33 when he got drafted. He was married just a few months before he was sent overseas. And he was in the 531st Shore Engineer Regiment. My mom has some belief that he was a truck driver. And just not knowing how he died, I think, was a mystery.
Another mystery is the death in England of 19-year-old Army Sergeant Lewis Bolton from California. His relatives are also still searching for the truth.
This is a photograph of my uncle and his wife in March 1944, just before he shipped overseas. When I was a little girl, I'd always be asking my father about him. He was just newly married when this photograph was taken. When my grandmother passed away, we found a box where she had some letters, and we opened it up, and they were letters from my uncle that she received after his death, and she couldn't bring herself to open them because it was so painful. And also letters she wrote to him came back with the words stamped "missing in action."
Like Private Simmons, Sergeant Bolton was getting ready to practice the Normandy invasion in the south of England on Slapton Sands. It's one of the most isolated and picturesque parts of southern England's West Country coastline. Now a World Heritage Site of outstanding beauty, back in 1944, it had striking similarities to the Normandy beach codenamed Utah. Perfect for secret military maneuvers.
It's remote. It's a long way away from really large centres of population. You have a handful of villages scattered in the vicinity. And here you've got this lovely big sweep of beach, ideal for troops to practice to land on. Great to bring landing craft in on so that they could discharge their vehicles.
Ideal for landing craft and soldiers, maybe, but Slapton was not so fine for highly classified training. In the 1940s, 3,000 Brits lived around the sands. To keep the rehearsals secret, the British government orders everyone to leave.
I was 13 years old and came back from school, and father was there in the kitchen with mother, and they informed us that we were going to be evacuated, and this area had to be used as a training area for the Americans. We kids thought it was a big adventure, to be quite honest.
But kids like Reg Hannaford were attracted by secret places and saw what was going on.
The ships in the bay, you know, some of our ships were shelling the fields all around, and it was, you know, a live ammunition place.
Eisenhower's D-Day invasion plan relies on hitting the beaches of Normandy with an overwhelming number of troops.
In 1939, when the war breaks out in Europe, right, the U.S. Army has 190,000 men. 190,000 men. When the war's over with, it has over 8 million men.
By April 1944, 1.5 million of those men are in England, preparing for D-Day. Back in America, there's even more activity, as industry works flat out to provide Eisenhower with the equipment he needs to drive the Nazis out of Europe.
All over the United States were communities that were involved in the manufacturing of war material. Of course, we think of communities like Detroit, Michigan, that are producing mechanized vehicles that will ultimately churn up the dirt of Normandy. But then there were also communities like Evansville, Indiana, which is where we are right now, Communities like this became extremely important in the build-up toward the Normandy invasion.
Indiana's Evansville shipyard was one of the nation's largest makers of what was to become an important Allied superweapon. A landing craft with a huge capacity, one that could sail across the Atlantic to deliver large numbers of men and machines onto the beaches of Normandy. They called it the Landing Ship Tank, or LST. They built so many, they didn't give them names. Each got a number.
These landing ships gave us this capability, the capability to conduct an assault, to land our assault force, and then to follow that assault force up with the ability to land mechanized forces onto an open beach. Something that the enemy couldn't do, something that we could do thanks to the LST.
The LST wasn't pretty or fast, but she was a game changer, and one of the main reasons the Allies eventually won the war.
Dwight Eisenhower labels 4 weapons as having been crucial to Allied victory, and those weapons were the M1 rifle, the Jeep, the C-47 Skytrain troop transport, and the LST. Prime Minister Churchill labeled this the most important ship of them all.
The most important ship of them all was headed for Slapton, but its rookie crews found it not only slow, but also hard to handle. They gave it a label of their own.
Large stationary target. Yeah.
John Kasner is one of just a handful of remaining veterans who can still tell us what it was like to serve on a large stationary target.
At the time, I was a seaman second class. Now, on a ship, there's nothing lower than a seaman second class except the keel. Of course, LST don't have a keel, so there you go. There's the captain's cabin here. Didn't spend any time in the captain's cabin, not unless you were in trouble, so you didn't stay out of there, you know.
In April 1944, most of the LSTs have come straight off their production lines, sailing the Atlantic to go to war for the first time. Their crews are equally untested. 17-year-old Thomas Glynn was one of them.
That's my photographs of when I was in boot camp when I first went in the Navy. So you can see how young I was. From boot camp, I was sent to a place in Jersey, an airfield, and at 17, I said I didn't join the Navy to be on land, I joined the Navy to be on a ship. He said, "Son, what's your serial number?" I told him. 2 days later, I was in New York waiting for an LST.
Another sailor waiting for D-Day was Nathan Resnick. At 18 years old, he's in an LST engine room as part of the so-called Black Gang.
That was a nickname for the engineering crew, Black Gang, down below. I'd say 90% were new recruits. I thought it was a well-trained crew, being all novices. Had a lot of confidence that we were going to be okay. That's the way I felt. Not to be saying it now, but I felt that way then.
While the Black Gang toiled below, up above on the LST bridges, the officers running the show were also inexperienced. Doug Harlander was an ensign from Wisconsin, more than 800 miles from the ocean.
I suppose being up here in Wisconsin, where I've been in a lot of small lakes fishing and that sort of thing, and I think that's why they put me in amphibious force. I had absolutely no experience in the Navy. I was 22 years of age.
Doug Harlander and his rookie crew were arriving in Slapton just 6 weeks before what Eisenhower planned would be D-Day, tasked with getting part of the largest amphibious landing in history onto Normandy's beaches. Few realized that they were about to be put through a rehearsal that would test them to the very limit and subject them to their first taste of combat. Exercise Tiger got underway on April 27th, when a fleet of ships containing thousands of American troops formed up just off Slapton Sands. On the other side of the English Channel, the Germans were also preparing for what was to come, strengthening their coastal defenses and monitoring increasing Allied radio transmissions. The first part of the exercise was the live firing from the sea and the beach, watched by General Eisenhower, his top brass, and Britain's Field Marshal Montgomery.
You're only a matter of a few weeks from D-Day in terms of April 1944. You're dealing with exercises involving hundreds of men, aircraft and ships at sea. Amphibious events like this take a lot of actual organising.
The organizing called for a first wave of infantry landing from small craft, followed later by the beaching of huge LSTs with their heavy equipment and specialist support units. The stakes couldn't be higher.
The logistical and informational problems that they're facing in the run-up to D-Day are massive.
The logistical problems start before Tiger even commences. The U.S. and Royal Navies are working on different radio frequencies and are unable to talk directly to each other.
British, Canadian forces there, and they haven't operated together. They don't normally operate together. And the way the U.S. Navy operates and the way the British Navy operates are not the same. Right? So first you have to, coordinate those operations and synchronize things.
Not only do the two allies fail to synchronize their communications, but their commanders are working to different plans without either realizing. The agreed Royal Navy bombardment was delayed by an hour. The radio signal notifying everyone of the change is not picked up. The British ships begin their live shelling just as the Americans hit the beach. This live firing footage was taken by a U.S. Navy cameraman. It shows how close the explosions are to the rookie soldiers. At this point, no one knows the extent of the casualties.
The buzz went through the ship, the Royal Navy cruiser, HMS Hawkins, that people were getting hit on the beach, which they were.
Further out in the English Channel, a group of 8 LSTs, now known as Convoy T4, which will eventually land more troops on Slapton Sands, is also in trouble. One of its 2 Royal Navy escort vessels, guarding against attacks by German submarines or torpedo boats, has been damaged in a collision and forced to return to port, leaving the convoy and its inexperienced soldiers and sailors with just a single British corvette, HMS Azalea.
There was no protection, no escort. That was a big thing. I think it was one corvette that was there, but I never saw it the whole time.
Despite the loss of their protection, the 8 LSTs continue to move slowly around the sea in Lyme Bay, less than 12 miles from Slapton, simulating a channel crossing to France, confident they are safe from enemy attack. But in Germany, radio operators are picking up chatter. The lack of a synchronized radio frequency between American and British forces means the usual radio silence is being broken, and the Germans are listening.
And at 2200 hours, they actually send out the S-boats, 2 S-boat flotillas, to look for what they think is a standard convoy.
Germany's S-boats were fearsome weapons. The S is for speed, or in German, Schnellboot. They were huge, heavily armed, fast torpedo boats, capable of taking on far larger warships. Only one German S-boat from World War II survives, now on dry land, in a small boatyard near Plymouth in the southwest of England, where it's being restored. It's one of the 9 that was sent to investigate the D-Day rehearsal.
This is our last survivor in terms of the sheer physicality of Exercise Tiger. The German S-boats are a lot like the Apollo moon rocket. It's all about power and fuel. It's all about those engines together with lots of diesel to actually power it through the water. So it's there to go very, very fast. But actually, the S-boat is only a weapons delivery system. And those are the key weapons behind me.
On board an S-boat in 1944, ready to hunt down the T4 convoy, was an 18-year-old engine mechanic, Karl-Heinz Thiel, now one of the very few S-boat veterans alive.
Schnell boats were beautiful. When you saw these boats going with full speed, it was a lovely sight. They weren't just strong in combat, they were beautiful.
A German S-boat is over 100 feet long. It's the equivalent of a small, heavily armed destroyer. If you want to stop D-Day, S-boats are what you really require.
It was quite a monster, lethal weapon. Man, it was the fastest thing out there. It beat anything the Allies had.
9 fast, lethal weapons are now heading straight for the coast of southern England. Meanwhile, off Slapton Sands, the T4 convoy of 8 LSTs continued to cruise slowly around without realizing the Germans were onto them.
It was basically dark. And when you're in a convoy, and all lights are out.
That night, it was a clear, moonlit, calm night. My duties are below deck in the engine room. But excise target that night, I was sleeping.
We had our life jackets on and our helmets and all ready to go. And, but we were not ready to go to war. We were on maneuvers. 10 miles off the coast of England. You don't figure you're going to have any problem. If we had seen them, we'd have thought they were just somebody in the maneuvers.
For John Kasner and his fellow rookies, the maneuvers were about to take on a whole new meaning. The S-boats had arrived, all 9 of them.
We then waited in the dark, and we waited to come into torpedo range. That was the lurking position.
The lurking position is an S-boat tactic, a totally silent attack, an ambush. Even the engines are switched off. At 1:30 a.m., after hours of lurking about half a mile from the convoy, the S-boat commanders have seen enough. The ambush is on.
When the attack starts, all hell breaks loose. The engines are started in slow, then half power, then full power ahead until we are within 600 meters of the target. We can't release torpedoes at full power, so we have to slow down. We had to spot the target with the target device, and then we released the torpedoes. And often they hit.
Gunloader Nathan Resnick is on the 3rd LST in the convoy, number 511. He's asleep in his bunk when the first torpedo strikes.
General quarters was sounded, so we got out of our bunks and got to my station on a 40-millimeter gun.
But the alert has come too late. The S-boats already have their first victim.
Within a few minutes, I looked astern and I saw a burning ship.
The ship on fire is the one right at the back of the convoy, LST 507. The next S-boat target is the LST right in the middle, 531, on which Ensign Harlander is officer of the watch.
About 2:18 in the morning, the radar guy says, there's a little pip over here in the starboard. So I went out to take a look at it, and I no sooner got out, the torpedo went off right below me. I came out of my room, and right in front of me, about 6 feet, the second torpedo came off. The hole came up about that wide on the deck.
The explosion created a fire fountain. You can't imagine that. It went hundreds of meters up in the air, and then it collapsed.
Lifted the ship up so quickly on that side, it threw me up in the air. It felt like someone hit the bottom of my feet with a sledgehammer. It was all darn hard.
The most tremendous, loud noise I've ever heard in my life. The ship went up in flames. There was fire all over, debris flying everywhere. The whole sky was lit up. It was just sheer bedlam.
Well, that thing went up in the air in one piece, and that thing, it was so perfect. That's the way it stuck in my mind. And I saw what I think it was a human being going end over end through the air. And then it wasn't long after that, they opened up the machine guns, and it looks like fireflies coming at you.
Hundreds are now dead, many of them burned by a gasoline fire raging on the sea, caused by fuel tank spillage.
What do you think? You just think, those poor wretches, they've all gone down with their ship. That is something you have to understand when you're on the sea. It's humans who handle these boats.
As the S-boats press home their deadly advantage, the LSTs are at last ordered to scatter and head for the protection of the shore.
The captain starts to move at flank speed. Get out of there.
The gunners on the LSTs fire wildly at anything that moves, including their own ships.
They were firing bullets up and across, and there was dents on the ship, and we had about 18 casualties, wounded.
On board the stricken LST-531, which is now listing badly, Ensign Doug Harlander is coping with another deadly danger. His cargo of amphibious beach assault trucks, nicknamed ducks, is on fire.
All of these ducks were undoubtedly full of gasoline. That is what was burning. It was going down fast. You could just feel it going down in jerks. And it kept on getting more and more down. And by the time it got over 35 degrees, well, you know darn well it's just going to go fast.
22-year-old Harlander is now in command of 531. His captain and senior officers are all dead.
That's when I gave the word to abandon ship.
Abandon ship! Abandon ship!
And so I jumped off and swam. After I got in the water, I had to swim through diesel fluid, and there was gasoline burning on top of it, so I had to swim around it.
The young ensign manages to reach a life raft and hangs onto the side.
The hardest thing to do is not to go to sleep.
But for Harlander, there is no immediate rescue. He is in the freezing water for 4.5 hours before a British destroyer finds him.
They put a rope around underneath my arms, and they pulled me aboard. Laid me down on that black, dark deck, but it was the best feeling I ever had. Being a British destroyer, they always have tea. He gave me some hot tea, and I couldn't, I had it wedged right here. I couldn't hold my fingers. I hold like that. I drank about half of it and spilled half of it, but it's still the best drink I ever had in my life.
With so few British warships on hand to pull people from the freezing sea, the death toll from the ambush would have been far worse, if not for one LST captain who broke ranks, ignoring the order to scatter and head for shore. As LST-515 circled back, gunner's mate Paul Gerolstein was leaning over the side, looking for survivors. He sees more dead soldiers than living ones.
It started to get light, but we were hearing the help and all the crying, you know, and all it was pitiful, really. The water was just covered with bodies, army bodies, and we were grabbing them to where they could work their way up. We pulled in over 100. We did that until there was no more survivors.
General Eisenhower's Utah Beach D-Day rehearsal is now a full-scale disaster. 2 LSTs have been sunk with their equipment, and 1 has been badly damaged. Worse still, at least 639 Americans are dead or missing. There are no German or British casualties, and the S-boats have disappeared into the night as silently and swiftly as they came. The 6 LSTs that survived the ambush hightail it to safety without landing their troops or equipment. Exercise Tiger is at an end. At Eisenhower's British HQ, as the extent of the losses becomes clear, the Supreme Commander orders an immediate wall of silence.
The heads of our departments told us in plain language not to be talked about. You don't know nothing, and keep it quiet. And that's what we did.
We were given orders that you cannot discuss this. It's top secret, and you'll be court-martialed if you talk about it.
Eisenhower says, you cannot document anything medically or anything from people. Fix the boys up, but you can't document anything. And if you do, you're subject to court-martial regardless of your rank.
Eisenhower's clampdown, coupled with an uncertainty about the exact death toll, sparked rumors and conspiracy theories that survive to this day. Before the dead are even buried, it's becoming clear that many soldiers drowned needlessly because they were wearing different life belts than those issued to the Navy.
Abandon ship!
This is what the Navy personnel wore during the exercise, and they easily keep you afloat. But Army personnel on board the LSTs were given what were called Navy M1926 life belts, potential killers if you didn't wear them right. Roger Ellis is a survival expert who knows just how difficult it is to remember your life belt training in the heat of battle.
Out of a cast of thousands, you've been selected to wear this wonderful piece of kit, which you will need to read. Would you like to read what it says on there?
Fold on this line, outside front, this edge down.
If you'd like to put it on, as it says on the instructions, make sure you've got the buckles, okay, in front of you so you can actually do it. Yeah, that would be the best way, wouldn't it? Okay, that's it. You follow it round. Remember now, it's dark, it's windy, we're being shot at. We need to get this on quickly. We're now getting explosions, there's lots of bangs. Okay, we're under attack. Move it round, that's it. Keep moving it round, that's it. Now you want the rubber hose, okay, pointing towards your mouth. There's a little knolled knob on the top. If we unscrew it anti-clockwise, start blowing hard into the life jacket. Make sure that we've got plenty of air in there. That's it. Now then, turn off the tap, otherwise all your hard work will be undone. How does that feel?
Tiring. Yeah.
It does, very tiring, isn't it? Take off the helmet, tuck it under your arm, okay, close. Put your nose, okay, in your hands, look straight ahead. We'll be looking down to make sure there's nobody there. And when I say abandon ship, step into the water. Abandon ship. That works.
The M1926 life belt worked well, but you had to wear it high on the torso below the armpits. Otherwise, when you hit the water, you'd tend to flip over.
This is what happens when you have it round your waist.
On April 28, 1944, on Lime Bay, a very large number of soldiers were wearing their M1926 life belt around their waist, wearing it incorrectly, when they jumped overboard.
An incorrectly worn life belt wasn't the only mortal danger for the Exercise Tiger GIs. Their helmets could be fatal too.
During Exercise Tiger, there was an unfortunate tragedy associated with the M1 helmet. A large number of the Army troops had the chin strap of the M1 helmet fastened underneath their chin. And when they jumped from the ship with the chin strap fastened and they hit the water, jumping from a height 10, 15 feet, a sudden uprush of water lifted the helmet, and with the helmet chin straps in place, it broke some men's neck.
The most serious rumor claimed that the Tiger rehearsals killed at least 110 men during the live firing part of the exercise, and that the dead were hastily buried in mass graves as part of a cover-up. British writer Nigel Lewis has been investigating this for years. He's uncovered a previously secret Army radio log.
We have evidence from a radio transmission stating shells landing amongst troops, shells bursting in the next field, this sort of thing. The casualties sustained in the firing on the 27th were 29, no fatalities.
Nigel Lewis's written evidence that there were no fatalities on Slapton Sands, just friendly fire injuries, might itself be part of a cover-up. When the official rehearsal death toll was issued soon after D-Day, it reckoned that 639 men had died. But, according to a secret cable from the overall exercise commander, Rear Admiral Moon, 749 soldiers and sailors were dead or missing, a difference of 110.
I am unaware of any other death toll of the American forces in World War II that has got this really very large discrepancy in it, the one that we find in Tiger of 110 people.
Admiral Moon never explained the large discrepancy. 3 months after Slapton, in August 1944, he committed suicide. For 70 years, a fierce debate has raged about the fate of the 110 men. Nigel Lewis believes he has finally solved the mystery, and the answer lies here, in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, hidden in plain sight, where anyone who cares to look can see it. Within the famous church's American Chapel is a 500-page honor roll that names every American serviceman who died while stationed in the UK during the Second World War.
These are people who died here in the United Kingdom in the course of World War II. About 8 years ago, I became aware of the St. Paul's Honor Roll, and I realized with some excitement that this could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the true death toll in Exercise Tiger, which has been disputed for so long. I've been through the whole roster of the World War II dead, which is 490,000 plus people. We have a discrepancy between the Navy figure, which is 639, which is composed of 197 Navy people and 442 Army. But then we have this strange blip of Admiral Moon on April the 30th, giving a set of figures that seem to add up to a death toll of 749. These two figures don't marry together, they don't fit. One of them is wrong, and I'm sure it's the 749 figure.
Nigel Lewis's forensic analysis of the Roll of Honor has identified the missing names and linked them to fatal incidents and accidents around the same time as Exercise Tiger, but not in the vicinity of Slapton Sands.
I can find no evidence whatsoever of those 110 people. They died in another way, of other causes. They were not on Convoy T4, and they did not die in Convoy T4.
Cambridge, England. This is where almost 4,000 American servicemen who died on active service in Britain during World War II are buried. Their families decided to leave them here rather than bring them home. Among them are some from Exercise Tiger, including Leland Simmons, whose great-nephew Ron Jensen is still trying to discover what really happened to him.
He went off to war, like hundreds of thousands of GIs, kissed his wife goodbye, left for war, and never returned.
Ron Jensen is the only one of Leland's relatives to continue the quest to find out how and why he died.
Maybe they'd given up that finding the details of his death, but they wanted to know where he was.
Knowing where the dead are is usually the job of the Army's Graves Registration Service, specialists who tend to those who are killed in action and make sure they receive proper burials. It's their job to record what happened and where.
Now, one of the very important things that the American Graves Registration Service was keen to do was have a very accurate paper trail.
But for Exercise Tiger, there was a less than accurate paper trail. Bodies were lost at sea, and General Eisenhower's secrecy order added to the confusion. However, there is a graves record for Leland Simmons.
What we have here are the headstone inscription interment records for every individual buried here in the Cambridge American Cemetery. If we go back further here to the S's, we'll find that we have, in fact, Leland Simmons.
Even when the dead are first buried in temporary graves and then moved, as was the case with Simmons, someone usually makes a note.
This is an actual, accurate record of where he was and when he was moved.
Leland Simmons is now buried here in Cambridge. Whenever a relative comes to see their loved one's final resting place, the name is highlighted with wet sand, taken from the beaches of Normandy.
It took almost 50 years, but somebody from the family was able to stand at Uncle Hap's grave. And I think that was important.
Cambridge also has a Wall of the Missing, a place where the families of GIs like Lewis Bolton, whose body was never recovered from the sea off Slapton, can come to grieve.
It is different when our family didn't have a loved one to bury. His platoon's job was going to be burying the dead on Utah Beach and then subsequently taking care of the dead as the front moved.
The loss of Lewis Bolton and others from his Graves platoon is another reason why there's been so much confusion about the death toll from Tiger. The very people who were to look after those who had been killed and create the paper trail were themselves dead or missing. Coupled with Eisenhower's secrecy order, this meant the families were given little official information.
Reported missing in action on 28 April 1944 in the European area, was reported killed in action on that date. As far as I know, nothing was received after the war either to give her any more details.
But one man who was involved in the disaster was allowed to commit his testimony to paper. Ensign Doug Harlander, who took command of the sinking LST-531 when his senior officers were all killed, was ordered by Admiral Moon to make a full report. It then remained classified for many years.
The ship was torpedoed on the starboard side by 2 torpedoes, separated by about a minute.
PFC Leland Simmons died on Doug Harlander's ship. 70 years later, his great-nephew, Ron Jensen, is at last able to read Harlander's report and find out how.
I've never seen this report. Approximately 02:18, this ship was torpedoed on the starboard side by 2 torpedoes, separated by about 1 minute of time. 6 minutes after the first torpedo, the ship rolled over, so they didn't have much of a chance of getting away.
In July 1945, knowing that D-Day had been a success, General Eisenhower published his own official report. It was 123 pages long. He devoted just 1 paragraph to the Exercise Tiger disaster. But in it, he reveals that he used the LST convoy not only as a dry run for the invasion, but also as a test to see how the Germans would react, an admission that historians have overlooked until now.
What's interesting about it is he states in black and white that there's a twofold purpose to these convoys. Firstly, there's the ostensible reason of amphibious training, but he also talks about testing enemy reaction to our mounting preparations.
Professor Bennett believes that putting the convoy at risk to test enemy reaction was a gamble by Eisenhower, one he did not reveal to the rookies on board beforehand.
Of course, in the circumstance of Exercise Tiger, the general's gamble doesn't work out. The Germans are able to get through that screen of destroyers and PT boats, and the result is a massive loss of life.
In his report, Eisenhower does not even mention that 639 Americans were killed.
His wording's quite striking. There was an unfortunate loss of life in the sinking of 2 LSTs. There's not really a great deal of regret expressed for the deaths of hundreds of American troops in the course of that. He's almost sort of apologetic for, in the general's terms, the loss of a resource that's going to be useful later on.
Eisenhower's decision provokes controversy and emotion.
The American people and American people and presidents and military leaders don't expect anybody to do that. All right? And we expect people to be very careful with the lives of Americans.
For the men who survived Eisenhower's D-Day rehearsal and the invasion itself, there are no recriminations, only sadness.
War is a series of big mistakes, it seemed like.
I didn't think too much about it because it was all part of our job, you know.
I never really talked a lot about it because it brought back bad memories.
And I hope that they learned something
General Eisenhower did learn from his mistakes. Changes were made, which probably saved lives on D-Day and beyond. A total of 73,000 Americans landed in France on June 6, 1944. Of the 34,000 who went ashore on Omaha, 2,000 were killed. On Utah Beach, 23,000 land, but only 250 are killed. Less than half the number who died during Exercise Tiger. Without the ultimate sacrifice of the 639 men during America's D-Day rehearsal disaster, no one knows how many more Americans would have died on the sands of Normandy.